All right, welcome back to the MedMind TFS 2013 Work Items, Field, States, and Reasons, Visio. Our last session, we created all the pages that we're going to use to create one page for each work item type showing the state model and the reasons. So we're going to hold down the control key, click on bug, navigate to the bug page. So what we want to do now is we want to start creating the state model. As I think we talked about before, in one of the stencils, which is located in napkin making Azure DevOps, the check mark indicates the stencil is open. So just to give you a little bit more information on stencils, I'm going to click down here on Azure DevOps. I'm going to right click and close it. Click people. Just going to close all these stencils. So if you don't have any stencils open, which may happen from time to time, you can click on more shapes and then you can open one or more stencils over here on the shapes window. And stencils contain masters, which are like cookie cutters to create new shapes on a page. So we're going to go to napkin making. We're going to click on Azure DevOps. And we're going to go back here and open up napkin making, drawing annotations, which is one of the most common stencils I use, that along with page shapes, which I've already talked a fair amount about. So we'll open up drawing annotations. And then we'll click back here on Azure DevOps. There are shapes for each of the work item types in STS Agile's template, but there's also, that's what these things at the top are. And then there's also two shapes, state rectangle and state bubble, which can be used to draw the state models. And I go back and forth. Sometimes I use the bubbles, sometimes I use the rectangles. It doesn't really matter. But when you drag a state rectangle on, it prompts you for the name of the state. And so the state up above was new. Say we have a state called closed. Shape is created now. Over in the shape data panel, you can change the text there. In fact, a whole lot of the custom shapes work this way, where data in the shape is exposed through shape data. Closed to, you can see the shape updates. And in a separate video, we'll learn about creating custom shapes and how all this works behind the scenes. For now, just benefit from it. Text size is where you can directly type in the font size. And you can also do that, of course, on the Home tab, just by picking a font. But you notice here it doesn't work. And the reason for that is the shape has been protected to allow you to only do it over here. And there's reasons for that that we'll cover when we talk about custom shape creation. But just to give you a hint, in the developer ribbon tab, and if you don't have that developer tab, remember how you turn that on. You go to File, Options, Advanced Settings, scroll down to the bottom, run in developer mode. So that has the benefit of turning on that ribbon, which gives you access to stuff that lets you dig a little bit more deeply into a shape. And so each shape has the ability to protect certain of its characteristics. So if you click on protection, the user interface is presented that shows different things that can be protected. Everything from sizing and positioning the shape to how it's formatted. In this case, the shape has been protected for text. If we unchecked that, click OK, then we can come back and change the font size here, and that didn't work because in the shape, if we go to the shape sheet, the text field has a guard property on it that says you can't change the size of the text through the user interface, even if you unprotect the shape. None of this matters for what we're going to do now, but I just wanted to give you a little behind the scenes look at some of these shapes and how they work. So in some cases, there's simple things that you can do in the user interface to interact with the shape. In some cases, you go interact with what I just showed you, which is the shape sheet. That'll be a whole separate lesson. And for many of the custom shapes that I created, I expose properties and behavior through shape data. So in this case, if you want to change the shape, you can just say font size 8. And you'll notice up here that new is also set to 8. If you select both shapes, if they share properties, you can update them both at the same time. So that's one reason to drive them with behavior like that. And then I also gave the ability to size the shape itself. Of course, you could always go to the shape, unless I've protected this, and you could manually change the shape size, but as you can see, that's not possible either, because back in the shape sheet, there's guard statements which basically make it protected for the width and height. So some things you can do in the user interface to any shape, you have to take steps to prevent that from happening. And just as a final thing, so if we draw a rectangle here, of course we can resize it manually. We can type text in it, and we can go to the font size here. I guess I got to highlight it first and change the font size through the user interface. So when you're learning Visio, for the most part, you're going to be interacting with the ribbon. You're going to be doing things that you would expect to be able to do. Change the font, change the size of the font, make it bold, the alignment and stuff. But when you start creating custom shapes, it's sometimes beneficial to lock all that out and just drive the behavior of the shape through data and right-click menu options to do things you want. Okay, so we'll delete that. We'll put this back to 1. And let's go to our Excel spreadsheet. And for the bug work item, let's do a screenshot and get the transitions and the reasons for those transitions for the bug work item. And go back to Visio, paste that in, and start creating the flow. So it looks like from new, or when you first create one, which doesn't have a pre-existing state, looks like the first state is active. So we'll make that active. I'm going to set the text size to 10, just anticipating some longer strings. And I'm going to Control D to duplicate. And we'll make the next state closed. I'm just kind of reading down the list. The next one, deferred. And so it looks like that's what we have. So we'll click cancel. We don't need that last one. So we've got active as the first state. Looks like close might be the last. Then we've got deferred, and whether you orient these vertically or put them off to the side really kind of depends on what the states are. So we've got the states now, and I don't tend to do anything fancy for the lines between the states. I just use a connector shape. So up here on the ribbon, Visio gives you out of the box, as I mentioned, I think in the first lesson, some primitives, including lines. So one thing we could do is we could simply, in those little dots around the outside of the shape are connection points. We can talk a little bit more about that in a different lesson. You can just draw a line between the shapes, and you can format the line with different styles, different weights. You can put, you can put arrows on the lines. But what is sometimes preferred is to use a special type of shape called a connector. So I'm going to click on connector, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw from active down to deferred. and it puts what appears to be a line there. But if we right click on it, it's actually a special type of shape called a connector, and that's got some behavior which we can cover in a future lesson. But it also has the ability to format it as a right angle connector, a straight connector, a curved connector. So if I switch to curved, you don't really see it because it's directly below, but you can give the line some shape by adjusting these control things. It's basically a Bezier, I think it's pronounced Bezier curve. You can right click on it, turn it into well, here, let's do this. Control 1, once again, selects the pointer tool. Sometimes it's really handy to be able to just quickly do that. So we'll move this over to the side, and then, we'll right click on the connector. We'll turn it into right angle. You can see it puts a couple bends in it. You can make it a straight connector. So you've got some flexibility. That's more than you can do if you create a simple line. It kind of adds behavior and some flexibility between line and arcs and freeform. It kind of puts all that together in this thing called a connector shape. So we'll use connectors to go between the states, and it looks like we've got active going to closed. So you can create new connectors in one of two ways. You can go to the connector tool and pick one of the connection points, drag down to closed, or once again, either going to the pointer tool or just Control 1 to get back to the pointer. You can select a connector, which we already have selected, Control D to duplicate it. So we have a new connector, and then you can just connect it as you want. So it looks like you can go from active to deferred. Well, we've already got that line. You can go from closed to active. So close, back to active. And you'll notice the line has some dots on it where you can adjust, and depending on what adjustments you make. So I'm going to click on this dot adjustment, I don't know what they're called, adjustment dot, and drag down. You can see it's trying to do something relative to the position you chose. So you can do some funky stuff to move things around. When you kind of line it up to where it was, it'll reconnect and take those extra segments. If you want to make it cool and curved, you can do that. I think for most of the STS Agile stuff, if not all of it, I just used straight lines. And then because it's a line, and I think it's technically considered a one-dimensional shape, might be making that up, you can put arrows on it. And you'll notice that, and it's a little bit hard to see, but depending on which of these you choose, you get arrows on both sides. Because of the way we drew it, and I think we just duplicated it. So let me show you this. If you go to connector and you start down on closed and then go up to active. So we started here and we went to active, and we go to line arrows, and we'll use the arrow that ends on the right. That kind of follows the order we connected it. So if you were to duplicate that line, Control D, and you wanted to go from deferred to closed, you either have to remember to, go to the end arrow and connect it, or if you happen to do it this way, you could always, you could always go back to line arrows and flip to the other orientation. Looks like it didn't connect. So there's a lot of flexibility, and I don't know that I have any strict guidance on what to use other than, be sure it makes sense, at least visually. So we've got a transition between active and closed. So we've got that. We've got a transition between active and deferred. So let's go put an arrow on that. We've got a transition from closed to active, yep. Deferred to active, so it looks like, in addition, let's put this over to the side. And if you don't want to spend all this time kind of moving it around, one trick you can use is you can convert it to a different style of connector. So let's say curved, and then convert it back. And it tends to take out all the unnecessary bends and segments. It tries to do the simplest thing it can, taking into account what other shapes may be on the page and what, where you're trying to get to. So it looks like I either removed it or it wasn't there, so let's put the arrow there. So we also have a transition from deferred to active, so I'll just Control-D, duplicate, grab the endpoint, take it down. Okay, so do we have everything now? Oh, well, let's make this new one. So I'll show you creating a new one. So we're going to take the connector, we're going to drag from nowhere to here, and maybe just to give it a little visual interest, we'll make this one curved. And so going into active, that's creating a new bug, and it looks like the reason you do that is making active bug. I put an asterisk by convention after the default, and you'll notice that we've put text on the line. I kind of skipped over that. And a lot of things you can do from wherever you are, and just realize we currently have the connector tool selected. I tend to prefer to always get back to the pointer tool. So once again, Control-1. If you double click on many things, by default, it will highlight the text. So I think what I've been using as a convention is bold. And this blue for making active. And it doesn't look like there's any other reasons to make that transition, so we'll leave that. And then active to deferred, it looks like that's oops, if I could spell, deferring. Now you can highlight just like we did before, or another trick you can use is you can go to a shape that's formatted the way you want, use our friend the format painter, and just go at it that way. When there's multiple reasons for making a transition, that can cause a little bit of problems, so I'll show you that one next. So it looks like from active to closed, this one is closing, put an asterisk at it. I'm going to press return, so we get a new line, and rejected. And like I said, the convention is to bold blue the default reason. So if I had instead gone up here, click the format pointer, you can see what it does is it formats all the text. So it makes sense. So sometimes the easiest thing to do is just, get the formatting from another line or shape, and then double click, and then just highlight the part you want to change. So we want to turn this back into black and take off the bold. But you can see doing that, unfortunately, took the blue away. So sometimes you have to work at it a little bit to get what you want, but there you go. So let's finish this out. Deferred to closed. Looks like it's closing. Oops. And once again, we'll just go grab the format pointer because there's only one there. Deferred to close is closing. Deferred to active, oh, that's the line we forgot to add. Whoops. So what happened there is I didn't grab the line at the adjustment dot. I accidentally grabbed it and it dragged it away. So I'm going to Control Z undo. Be a little bit more careful. See the difference between the 4-headed arrow and the 2-headed? Just drag this a little out of the way. And it looks like, and I don't know if you can see, but there's a grid on the back of the page, and Visio sort of will try to snap to those things. And I don't know if I showed you that. So on View, there's a couple things. If you click connection points, when you highlight a shape that has connection points, when you're trying to connect to a shape that has connection points, you see the little dots where the connection points are. If you turn off connection points, they're still there, and you get the little green box that shows that you're over a connection point. So I tend to leave connection points off, but it really is a personal preference, and I go back and forth. I'm not sure I can tell you what auto-connect is. Dynamic grid, the thing about dynamic grid is it gives you some visual indicators if shapes are aligned. And so let's go grab this shape, Control D, just to get it here, Control D again. And now watch what happens when I drag deferred underneath the other deferred. See how you get some green lines showing you the edges and then the center, and then off to the side, same kind of thing. And also shows you spacing, and it tries to find something else on the page that has a similar spacing. That's the double-headed green arrow to the right. That feature is turned on here with dynamic grid. So if I turn that off, you don't get that highlighting. Now, one thing about the dynamic grid, it works great if there's few things on the page. It obviously has a little bit harder time if you've got, like this all makes sense, and you can see that the spacing between active and deferred to close, Visio is claiming is the same because it's showing you the 2 double-headed green arrows. But if we, kind of go over here, it doesn't really know what to use for horizontal spacing, even though these may be similar in space. So you just have to play around with it. And you notice here it's lining up deferred with the edge of that blue box below, and over here same thing. And then as we get closer, it's saying, hey, this seems like a reasonable spacing to use. So anyway, the dynamic grid is something I tend to use a lot, so I just leave that turned on. And then while we're here, you can turn on and off the ruler. You can turn the grid in the background on and off. I think I know what guides are, but I think I have to put one on there first. So one thing you can do if you have the ruler turned on is you can click on the ruler, and I'm holding down the left mouse button, and you can drag on a guide, and it's this vertical line. If you drag from the left, it's a horizontal line if you drag from the right. And then what you can do, I'm clicking on the shape now, you can snap it to, and the fact that it's snapping is because deferred has a connection point. It's not that it's really snapping, it's more a question of what shape I've got. So if I just go create an out of the box rectangle and move it around, oh, actually it does show the same thing. That's interesting. That box does not have connection points on it, so this must just be default behavior. But anyway, the guides are nice if you're trying to, whoops. See, this is the problem. I'm currently in draw mode with the rectangle, and I accidentally drew a rectangle when I was trying to select something. So I'm going to Control Z, and I'm going to Control 1 to get back to the pointer tool. That's good indication of why I always like to get back to the pointer tool, so I avoid creating things when I've selected a creation tool. So here's a quick way of getting all these shapes lined up. Of course, you can do alignment. So sometimes alignment meets your needs. Sometimes you can use these alignment tools, and I think, well, I guess I'm not right about that. You can't drag them off, so if you highlight it, you can delete it. And once again, you just click on the ruler and you can have multiple. So kind of handy for doing certain things. So that's a feature of turning on the ruler, guides, we've talked about, and I think that's in combination with the dynamic grid. And grid pretty obviously just turns the grid on and off. I think you can format the spacing on the grid. That's something you can dig into on your own. It's probably a page formatting thing. So anyway, let's go delete those. Showed you a little bit about page layout and stuff. So we've got a transition from active to deferred, and it also looks like we have one from deferred to active. So I'm going to Control D, and like I said, drag it around, grab the connection point, and deferred back to active is reopening. So reopening star, and as you can see, these kind of run into each other. So what you can do is highlight the line, and you'll see this little yellow dot. That's a control point. So I'm just clicking, holding down the left mouse button and dragging the text up. Oops, I don't want to move the endpoint. It can be tricky. Sometimes you have to zoom in and just get on the connection point. So then you can move the text out of the way. So do we have everything now? We got making active bug, active to close, closing and rejected, active to deferred, deferring, close to active. Oh, we don't have that. Close to active is also reopening. And we'll just go grab this, go back to home, format pointer, paste. Oh, accidentally caught the line, so we'll just drag it up to the middle connection point. This is me just being particular. Deferred to active, reopening, deferred to closed. So I think that's the complete state model, and highlighting the transitions, which ones are default. Later on, we might come back and add who can do it, although I don't think there's any constraints on who can perform it, because I'm pretty sure that shows up in the Excel if they exist. It does look like some fields are required. I haven't really figured out a way of visually showing that. So the next step is to, for each of the other work items, drag state rectangles onto the page. So if we go to code review request, drag state rectangles onto the page, go to the Excel document, find code review request, look at this, maybe do a screenshot, paste it in place. So do that for each of the different work item types, and then we will have a nice set of state models for MedMine, and then we can talk about what that might mean for the migration. I typically don't leave this on the page. I guess you could if you wanted to, just as, kind of a reference point, maybe drag it down. If it's a really complicated state model and it's got a bunch of steps, you may have to, spend some time thinking about layout. If you highlight shapes, and you'll notice when you highlight, I'm clicking and dragging by holding down the left mouse button, and I'm going to get real close on the right side to reopening. And you can see this outer box, that's the selection window. So it kind of shows you what Visio is selected by putting a selection box around everything. So it looks like we've missed reopening. So you can either drag again, or you can hold down the shift key and click on things you want to add. And why isn't that picking it up? That's interesting. So let's try to do a real big selection box. I don't think I can explain to you why, even though we've got that arrow way out there, it's not showing up. So let's see if we move this down. I'm clicking, holding down the left mouse button, there's a reorientation arrow. And if you look up at the ruler, I can't point there with the mouse, but there's 3 vertical lines. Right now, the left is near 3.5. The middle one's near 5. So it shows you kind of the bounding of the selection, and just know that 5.5 is in the middle of a 8.5 by 11 page. I'll let it go. So that doesn't seem right. In this case, just may want to select it and go, well, I know those middle things should be active. That's very confusing to me why that's behaving that way. All right, so that's creating a state model.